And we are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content channel. We are a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. We did a weird little series last month that didn't kill me. It didn't really even come close, but it was exhausting, called Zine Questing, where every day I would talk about 10-ish projects that were live on Zine Quest, or the art of some of them, and then I took a day or two off every single week. We covered a little over 250 of the 383 projects that ended up live on Zine Quest, and it was a blast. We had a good time. We are coming back to you now just to talk about Zine Quest 3, what happened during it, some of the numbers from Zine Quest 3, and then looking a little bit specifically at what were you taking away from that? When I say we, I'm talking about these two lovely guests that I have with me, who I'm going to let introduce themselves, because it seems dumb for me to try to memorize people's biographical information when they have access to most of it off the top of their head. I'm going to kick it over to Joe first. Joe, tell people who you are, what you do, where they can find you on the internet, and why you wanted to talk about Zine Quest.
Sure. Hey, Jody Simone. You can find me on Twitter at iHeartFargo. I run a company that teaches analog game design to kids and also does corporate gamification, which is a phrase that's gross, but is the best way to describe what we do, called the Academy of Games. So I am a person who is around a lot of analog games and a lot of analog game designers, but is not myself a designer. My background is data science and big data analytics. So Zine Quest is always a fun time to dig through, hundreds of Kickstarters and see what the heck the trends actually are in the market. So yeah, fun times for me. That's all I got.
Awesome. We're going to kick it over after that to Ben. Ben, tell people who you are, what you do, and where they can find you on the internet.
Absolutely. I'm Ben Edelman, and I'm at Panda Theist on Twitter, mostly is where you can find me, also Discord. The boomboxchant.wordpress.com's my blog. That's probably why I'm here. Been tracking all the Zine Quest numbers this year. Former Ennies judge was probably where I got any sort of name recognition in RPGs, and now I'm, I don't know, always talking, reviewing, and working on my own stuff in the background.
I feel like that deeply undersells how valuable a insight and review hub you have become over the past year.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I hate talking about myself. That's all you're gonna get.
Sure. And I will shout out in a moment of self-awareness. We didn't intend this conversation to be three white guys talking on the internet, because Lord knows there's enough of those. Anya from Kickstarter Games was going to join us, but was not able to at the last minute. But we decided, because we couldn't find out a good time to reschedule, to go ahead and go on with the conversation. But if you out there who are watching right now, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, please share them in the chat. Wherever you are watching, whether that's on YouTube, Twitch, or Facebook, we can bring those questions, thoughts, and conversations in here and talk about them. If you have something you want us to talk about desperately, and you message me at +1EXP on Twitter, that's going to be the best place to drop a link, because you can't drop them in the chat. Only I can, because we like to avoid weird spammers. Normal spammers we're totally fine with. The weird ones are the ones we're trying to keep out. With that said, we did not spend enough time beforehand talking about format, which we absolutely should have. Let's just start out with maybe a project each of us loved from Kickstarter. I know we were talking about this ahead of time. I know that each of us backed at least 20 plus projects. I think my number was, if I exclude $1 backs, my final number ended up near 40 projects. And then, I know, Ben, you were talking about 20 plus. Joe just told me that he backed every single project on Zine Quest at the all-in level. And so
200. So not all, but a lot.
The hero we need.
The hero we need. Jeff, if you send me the Hard Times promo link again on Twitter, I will 100% post it in the chat. It's a throwback to our live stream the other night where we covered Worldwide Wrestling and talked about the best promo cutting video, who was also done by the only professional wrestler I've ever met in real life. And so, but that said, let's whip it around kind of in reverse order. Ben, tell me about one of the projects that you loved this Zine Quest, and I'm going to pop it up here for us to talk about.
Yeah, let's start with Crescent Moon. Um, it's based on Forged in the Dark. It's this beautiful, beautiful game. I love the art style. You're basically kids exploring a dream world and facing potentially your darker selves. So it's got some um, very Le Guin, Earthsea vibes. Um, yeah, it's got really nice graphic design already. There's lots of promo information. I like they call it Forged Under Starlight. Was a nice little touch on there. Here, I'll just let you scroll down there.
Yeah,
I mean, the
I
art
remember
is
covering this project. Like somebody had recommended it to me for one of our art features, and I had already pulled it up for the day. I was like, oh no, I already have that one on my list. It's so gorgeous. Actually, one of the very simple things they did on their page, I kept on telling people like, stop giving Zine Quest 3 logo real estate on your page. Like if people are already here on Kickstarter, like they already know. Like it's not, like, and they either are here because of Zine Quest or they're not. But they worked the Zine Quest logo in with their colors on their header in a way that actually was really gorgeous and really beautiful and made it feel like part of the project, which I think is the way to go when you're doing it. But yeah, like absolutely gorgeous project. Incredibly fun look to it. And I love that they made the Forged in Darkness feel kind of their own, or Forged in the Dark. So yeah, very cool project. Joe, how about you? What's a project that you loved that I'm going to pull up really quickly?
Sure, and I just sent you a crap
Did
ton
you?
of links, but
Well, let me go back to the one where people can't see me looking at my Twitter real quick, and hop over there. Tell us a little bit about the project.
Hope is Not a Plan, a journaling game of professional horror by Steve Wright. I did not know this person. This is for me a kind of first time introduction. They apparently have some itch stuff up already, but nothing I'd ever heard about. Um, to give the one line summary, it's a solo journaling role playing game about the existential dread of professional project management. Um, it is not a game that honestly sounds fun to me, but I have reached a point in my life where I am completely full up on fun things. I have so many amazing, beautiful, seemingly joyous role playing games that I will literally never play. Um, and so I've in this past year kind of transitioned to I don't know, games that make me consider what the heck else we can use play for. And of the many and sundry, I don't know, Zine, I mean, there's so many Zine Quest projects, and a lot of them really were interesting, but a lot of them were fun games. Not to deride that, like that's kind of where we all start and where we all show up. But I saw this and I was like, okay, somebody's using the Wretched and Alone SRD, Chris Bissett's Wretched based system to make a game about like dying in a corporate environment, like dying internally in a corporate environment. Someone has put their time and effort into replicating a miserable, horrible experience that many people can deeply relate to.
Yeah,
I don't know. It struck me as one of those. Okay, games can be more. Not games can be art, right? I think that's often a question asked, and not one I necessarily care about. But games can be tools for things beyond what we think they normally are. And of all the projects from Zine Quest this year, I think that's the one that really stood out in that regard. Um, yeah, that's it. I'm very excited for it. I expect I'll play it and immediately feel worse. And you know
amazing.
what? Sometimes that's what you need.
I am yeah, and I also like I remember when the creator first like added me about this project because we featured it a couple times. I thought it was a really killer concept. I was like, this seems like it should be part of corporate onboarding in the world today. Even as part of an interview process, we're just going to slide this across to you and this Jenga tower and watch you play this game for the next couple of hours and just watch how you respond to all the horrible things. And then we'll decide if we want to hire you after that.
And you see more and more projects like this, or therapeutic games, are something that's started coming to Kickstarter. And they're on the margins. I tend to see them just because I'm on Kickstarter like every single day scrolling through projects. And I think this is the first time I was like, okay, this is the kind of stuff I see coming out of the board game space, because that's really where serious games, capital S, games, corporate games, basically. That's where those people pay attention. And this is the first time I see it coming out of the role-playing space.
Yeah, I feel like this one and Blood Feud were two of my there's a larger conversation here games. One of them really heavily leaning into this is a larger conversation we want people to have, and this one leaning into like we've created a fun game that also helps open up a much larger like conversation within corporate realities that talk about how we deal with some of these different things that I thought were really, really, really good. And there's some other ones and there also too. Ben, did you have any thoughts on it?
Lichcraft was the one that sort of took a social stance that I found interesting. About waiting forever to deal with the I think it was the NHS transition approval. There's a lot of really interesting creative projects doing very strange things, and I think with this many projects, even with as many funded as they did, like to stand out, you kind of have to figure out a new approach to what you're doing. So yeah, I think it's a interesting future we're running into. I think we'll keep seeing more and more weird different approaches to things.
Well, and let's talk about the numbers a little bit specifically. I know that that yours are kind of third-party compiled, Ben, but you are on right now the stream with us. So and I think we ended up titling you because I was like, "What's your title?" And you were like, "I don't know, just some guy." And I think I called you keeper of the bone box chant or something like that, because you did just a phenomenal job of covering a lot of the emerging data from Zine Quest this year. Some of this conversation started out by people talking about like my streams and your data coverage, and so let's just kind of roll through some of the numbers as you saw them. I know you just updated them. I don't know if I've got the site up. Not that there's
the site is not quite up to date. Yeah, I've got my private little Excel sheet here.
Hit us with some of the numbers. Like I've got the site in the background, but hit us with some of the numbers for Zine Quest this year.
But yeah, so the current like big numbers I think that are interesting. It made basically $1.67 million, which is basically twice last year. 384 projects. I accidentally had one up and I think one got canceled. 373 of which funded, so that's 97% of projects funded this year compared to 94% last year. So there's a straight increase, double the money, double the projects, increase in the percentage of projects funded of those projects. So it was a huge success. You can see like the top numbers are not, like Zine Quest numbers are not quite the same project goals as most random RPG projects. A lot of projects are doing, a couple $100 their goal for versus like, your big projects. But I mean, we hit multiple projects hitting tens of thousands of dollars. Here, let me see what the current numbers are for those.
30 or 36 the last job up, but I assume there are more since.
Yeah, so the top projects, Bucket of Bolts made like 100K. Throat Store made 50K. There's Fantastic Long for Adventure was 33K. There's like 8 projects that made 20K. Another, 20ish that made 10K plus. I mean, so there's like very real money being thrown around for these types of projects.
Yeah.
I remember early in the Zine Quest, there was a will One Ring ruin Zine Quest, and the answer is no.
Yeah.
It turns out it had no effect. There's just a massive amount of money being spent on these projects.
And that's the thing. Like it is questionable. Like somebody was like, how do people back so many Zine Quest projects? And I was like, I run Zine Quest project to back Zine Quests. Like that's 100% all the money that I made writing a Zine Quest project will go back into the projects I backed on Zine Quest. Like, you know, other than printing the game, that's pretty much how it worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're significantly increased audience sizes. Like a lot of projects had well over 100 backers. I think there's sometimes not as much overlap as we think, particularly if we spend a lot of time on Twitter. Like we hang out with a lot of the same crowds, and turns out that's not the RPG market. That's just a very small section. And you see projects that I saw basically no one talking about on Twitter get, you know, tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah, I think the RPG market is just a lot broader than most people realize.
Yeah,
which is exciting.
Do you think it's a realization thing? Like, I don't know how many people would be genuinely surprised to find out how, in a dollars and cents term, the Twitter design sphere is kind of materially insignificant. Like, I love those people; they are my friends. It is where I am all day, every day, and as a person who has to buy large orders of games and pitch people on games and sell people games. Yeah, they are not and have never been a barometer of where the market is moving. And I don't think people would be terribly surprised to find that out. I almost think like it's a thing we just choose to ignore.
Yeah. I think a lot of the times when I think about, like, okay, when I'm posting something on Twitter as a creator, like as somebody who wants somebody to back my game, my approach is oftentimes like, look, I do want all my friends who are on Twitter to retweet this, not because I just want to know that they know about it. I'm assuming that most of them do, but because I know there are people who follow them who don't follow me. And there is kind of that middle ground of like, yes, a bunch of creators are going to see this the more that retweet it, and that's kind of an insular group. But there's also all the people who just happen to follow them because they love their games, and that's sometimes, like, if I'm in marketing mode, that's what I'm
Sure.
you know, tapping into. You know, same thing on the RPG Zines group on Facebook. That community, which is phenomenal. If anybody hasn't joined it yet, if you're on Facebook, if you're an old person like me, go hop on there and check it out. It is tremendously open, but there's a realization early on. There's 2,000 people in that group, but of the active members, they're both creators and consumers, right? Like you're targeting kind of that inward. Last year's Zine Quest 2, my game Beards and Beyond, financially did better, but it was because I was able to bring in, like, I run 2 beard care brands. And so I was able to market my game towards people who love beards, who may not be RPG fans, but would 100% back this game, and actually brought in more money than I did this year. Though this year Repugnant was a far more polarizing game. People either loved it or they didn't want to look at the page at all. And so, you know, we brought in slightly less with slightly more backers. And so it was targeted way more, I think, at the core of, like, here are people who play games, who are interested in a game executed well. And if we had done a broader theme that had an outside appeal that could have brought in other market segments, we would have seen a whole lot more people come in. The other thing, and Starfish Killer already noted on this, you know, you've got 5 out of 10 of the top funding projects, or the top backed projects, are mothership projects, right? Like, like we watched Mosh just kind of kill things this year. And if you look at those projects, you'll see some of the same names repeated over and over again as content creators, contributors, people who did the soundscaping, people who did the videos, people who helped with some aspect of the project. You'll see the same names connected on a lot of those projects. And I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about also too. So, I mean, when I looked at some of the numbers, some of the top stats, that's one of the things that jumped out at me, is like the power of seeing some of these communities at work together, and how some of the brands that make the main game are supporting third-party projects and smaller creators was a really interesting thing to see in Zine Quest also. I think we saw it mostly for OSC and Mothership are the 2 that I think did a really good job, but I think Mothership blew it out of the water comparatively.
I think Morkborg is also worth a mention in that regard, though not as constrained to Zine Quest, right? Like, Mosh destroyed Zine Quest, did incredibly, as a kind of booming IP recognition standpoint.
Well, I think they're different conversations though, right? I think like Morkborg and OSE were, these systems are popular. Mothership was the systems popular, but it was also the result of the creator Discord basically working together and planning how they wanted to launch projects and help each other advertise, right? So there was the popularity of the system, but there's also the leveraging of the community, which I think is interesting, right? They planned how that was going to happen.
Is that distinct from Morkborg? And I'm not deep in the Morkborg sphere, but when I look at the stuff that someone like Liber Ludorum, who has been tracking all of the Morkborg third-party publisher projects. When I listen to what they're saying, it sounds like there is this very tight Discord community, much like Mosh, with input from the Stockholm Cartel folk that is kind of organizing and hyping up the IP and hyping up the system.
That's true. There might be.
I think we're seeing a couple things at play. Like, I think one of the difference is, like, if I was going to name the differences, I think I see this. Like, Morkborg has some third-party groups that help support Morkborg with Stockholm Cartel. Stockholm Cartel does. Like, Stockholm Cartel has some really interesting things with marketing that are totally worth a different conversation outside of Zine Quest. But actually, I don't see them create the kind of pop around Zine Quest that Mothership does at all with some of the intentionality, because their focus is a little bit more like, we want to support you, we want to help you, we want you to be able to create things in our universe and sell them for money. But we're going to be very hands off about a lot of that. Like, go create the content, and we want to know what we can do to help you, but we're not going to be right in the middle of that conversation, right? And so I think you see Morkborg people, there's a lot of third-party Cult of Morkborg groups that have created support on their own outside of Stockholm Cartel. It's a popular system. People like it. For OSC, it's a popular system. People like it. And they did a little bit of pushing. Like, Necrotic Gnome did a little bit of pushing on some of those projects. They did a couple of, like, they collated some of the projects into, like, blog posts and some other stuff like that. Pushed them out a few times via their channel also too, which I think is a little bit more intentional than what we saw Stockholm Cartel do with the Morkborg stuff. And then you saw Mothership. You saw Sean McCoy being a collaborator on a lot of the projects. You saw that Discord community get together. You saw the Whisper Collective, like, gather around each other and say, here's how we're really intentionally building these projects to build and scale off of each other to launch them out bigger and further. And I don't think a single one of those projects funded for less than $12,000 in the end. One of them may have been sub 10. But I think most of those, not all the Mothership projects, but all the ones in that particular group, were almost all between 10 and 20K. Like, I mean, it was an incredibly successful process.
Yeah, I think the lowest was over 10K, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah. So the point you brought up earlier, and I think has some bearing on this, which is, you know, the design sphere market and then the external market. Because when I look at Morkborg and even to an extent OSE, right, you know, Gavin is in the community, and like the SK guys are in the community, but when I look at the third-party producers, they do tend to seem more like outsiders, and it might just be that they're it's international versus, you know, North America. It could be any number of distinctions, but then I look at someone like Philip Reed, who's probably like the most successful Morkborg third-party publisher, and he's the president of Steve Jackson Games. Like, he is a established player, and he does this Morkborg stuff on the side for himself. And it just hits a completely different audience. Whereas I think you're right, Sean is deep in this space and has been deep in this space for a long time. Sean is like old head G+ dude. And I love Sean. I talk to Sean all the time. I'll go to bat for Sean forever, and I'll go to bat for, you know, the Moonrat Collective folk. Like, Fiona's amazing, and she was on some of the projects. But I do feel like there is a in-scene, out-scene distinction as much as there is like a active collaboration distinction.
Yeah, I could totally see that. So I got to play Desert Moons of Karth when it was coming in, and it was interesting talking to Joel. It was Joel's first project out of the gate, right? And I don't know exactly where he ended up on the scoreboard, because it's a scoreboard. When there's numbers that you can measure and there's things that you can put next to those numbers, it inherently becomes that to a certain degree. I would like to think it's not hyper competitive, but I mean, it's still there. You know, this was Joel's first project out of the gate, first time designer. You know, like, killed it in absolutely every sense of it, and absolutely like deserved do that. Like the setting is phenomenal, the game is good, the base system it's built on is phenomenal, and so it's not, he didn't just walk in and get the benefit of that community. He's been invested in it and plugged into it, and so that's, I think, an example of somebody going from some of that outsider to that insider ability, and it's tapping that insider core. But yeah, I think it is interesting to think about how we start to push things, especially in Zine Quest, outside of the insider group of designers, especially when you have so many new designers coming in who are bringing their 20 or 30 friends who just love their idea, or their 500 friends who really love their idea, whatever it is. I think it's absolutely a great part of the conversation. So other thoughts on any of that?
I was gonna say the other big story was journaling games.
Oh, yeah,
solo
let's talk about
games
journaling
were massive this year.
Yeah, Hibernation was top on my list, but I'll go ahead and plug one of the games I was most excited about at the end, and that was, did I not bring it up? It was Apothecaria, which if I didn't, I'm just going to do real quick. Apothecaria did a bunch of really amazing things with it, and also we can talk about a little bit about the number one game for Zine Quest being Bucket of Bolts, and that's absolutely a sign of the strength of solo journaling games. What do you guys attribute that to at this point in human history? Like, do you guys think part of that's quarantine? Do you think it's just a new genre that we've arrived at people really loving and respecting? What is it about journaling games that you think are specifically hitting people really strongly right now?
Ben, you go first.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think, quarantine is definitely a part of it. Once you sort of start getting into gaming groups, it's easy to find more and more gaming groups. But it's tough to make the leap. And if you don't like heavy games, Roll20 is not necessarily going to get you where you want. I also think there's a lot of people who just like a very different experience. Like if your favorite game is something like Quiet Year, Mothership's not going to be the answer for you, right? I mean, you can like both things, obviously, but sort of your next step could be something closer to this, where you can do something at sort of like a macro level. You can see a larger scale of a story rather than just a personal story in a lot of these. The stories of towns, spaceships. I think they have a different feel and a different scope. And while quarantine's part of it, I think they're also like just scratching an itch for a lot of people that like nothing was really doing. Apothecaria is brilliant. And Anna did Delve last year, I believe, which also did very well on like the early big boost journaling games on Zine Quest. I think that was in the top 10 last year, I want to say. That's sort of my feel. I don't know, Joe, where are you?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't personally get solo games. Like as a cultural phenomenon, I have some ideas, but like as a play experience, they've never really been my thing. So it has been somewhat surprising from a egocentric view of the universe to watch them blow up when I like can't really relate. That said, the current state of VTTs sucks shit. And so I can totally see a person who is maybe more as you said, someone who's into a Quiet Year or Dream Askew, Dream Apart, really any of Avery's games, I guess. Like someone who's into a more contemplative, introspective gaming experience, which I think you can certainly have in more trad games. And there's a long history of games like that. But if your option is using a VTT that is terrible, and not built for the type of gaming experience you want, and probably actively detrimental to the experience you're trying to get out of the games, or not playing the game. I can imagine a lot of people will simply not play the game. We all have computers, we all have phones. There are lots of digital offerings that give us this kind of introspective experience. Any number of I could just spend the next hour rattling off games that would work as like solo games. But if you still want to play a role-playing game, solo journaling RPGs really open that up. Where does that start is a question that I've been wondering, right? Is it Thousand-Year-Old Vampire? That's the first one I can remember really catching the popular eye.
I feel like I feel like Vampire blew up, but I feel like it was established, like it was happening before that game. I feel like I just don't know that it was big. I mean, Artifact, which was solo RPG, was #1 last year. I feel like it did grow out of like Quiet Year and Skeletons and a few other games that were kind of map drawing, world building games, weren't designed for solo, but you could sit down with that deck of cards and really solo through any of those games really easily. They're
Ball of
not
Magic.
yeah. They're not queued that way, but there's nothing that would prevent you from doing any of them. And I think we see some of that come in. Will Yobs threw out Ironsworn.
Ironsworn's a good example. Thanks, Will.
And so I think we saw people looking for, in the board game space, more and more people were like, I want solo play, I want solo play, I want solo play. And I feel like people in the RPG space were like, well, that's not what you do in an RPG, until somebody was just like, unless you do. And and then I think we saw it be a part of a larger tabletop culture and then just transfer into the medium of tabletop RPGs and a few. And I think Ironsworn may be one of the first ones I can really think of. Unless Ben, does one come to mind for you that was early on that may have been?
I mean, there were a lot of them on itch that I wasn't as familiar with. But I mean, I think this is maybe mirroring some things that are happening in video games too, right? Like the indie video game scene, things like Gone Home or Firewatch or things like that, are suddenly offering different experiences and doing very well because people don't want just fantasy hack and slashes, right? I think there's different tones to explore. To your point about God, blanking the name earlier that you were mentioning, the work simulator, right? There's different experiences people are looking for that the big names in games right now just aren't providing.
Yeah, and I do feel like Wretched really kind of helps blow that open. And that actually brings us to another point. So we talked about the Mosh collaboration, but, in the middle of Zine Quest, Matt Saunders, Chris Bissett, Jack, and Anna announced Rainy Day Games, right? Which is their solo games collective, which started out before quarantine as a conversation around how can we collaborate in a way that allows us to go to conventions in different parts of the countries and rep everybody. And now there's some bigger conversations around how they support each other. And I think every single one of those creators 100% stands on their own rights. Matt put out a phenomenal project this year. Chris put out D36, which is gorgeous. And I'm upset I didn't get one of the hardback copies of, but I'm totally fine that they were gone when I got there an hour later, because I'm super excited for Chris to have been.
Ben, did you get one?
Successful? Did
you?
Absolutely. Oh, dang you. I'm coming for it. You saw Apothecaria come out, and we saw Buckets of Bolts win the whole thing. We saw, like I said, it's ostensibly a competition because we can see who's ahead. And Bucket of Bolts just knocked it out of the park this year. And let's talk about that. Let's talk. They were.
Can I just to interject? There's one thing I do want to bring up before we go off of kind of the broad topic of solo games. The thing that has really been confusing me, right? I get conceptually the meditative solo journaling experience. I try never to introspect because the inside of my skull is a nightmare. But I can see why someone wants to do that. What has been really surprising is the number of solo hacks for trad or OSR games that have been coming out of the 3PP community, right? Again, Mosh, Morkborg, but even, the Year Zero engine from Free League for that, that's a solo experience I don't quite get. And I wonder, I get it historically, right? I can see it in, Advanced Fighting Fantasy, or something more modern like Against the Dark Master. But I wonder if, okay, so here's a question. Are solo RPGs more popular in the UK and Europe because there is a much stronger tradition of solo trad and more OSR games from when those designers were younger?
That's a good question. I can't help but think there's probably a good chance that there's an influence there. I mean, obviously we see generations of play, not in the same way as necessarily people influence each other. Like what gets designed for one generation influences the next set of iterations on it. That actually strikes kind of true in some ways. I mean, obviously that would just be pure speculation. I'd love to know, chat, like, what do y'all think? Do you think there's a chance that regional kind of popularity of it helped pop that out or not? I don't know. Like I said, that makes a lot of sense to me. I know that I buy journaling games the same way I buy journals, only physically, and to put on my shelf and probably not play. Like I want the beautiful solo game. Whether or not I will ever play it is not the point. I read every single one of them and I go through it and I look at it as prompts because for me they're great. I love motif and theme building, and that's all solo journaling games are. And so I love the question process of seeing how that evolves and it influences my GM style. That's the primary reason I buy journaling games. But I'm totally interested in that.
I will say it's beyond just like journaling and OSR. The what is it? DM yourselves was for basically making 5e adventures solo or GMless, and that made close to 20K. I think it was like 18K at the end. So I don't know regionally, but I think it's well beyond a single style of play.
Yeah.
So some of the thoughts from the chat are everyone. Ben says everyone here read Finding Fantasy, which is probably a good call.
Yeah.
Choose Your Own Adventure was huge in the States, and I think there's some parallel there. I think Fighting Fantasy lent itself to this is a role-playing game. Choose Your Own Adventure flew under the radar of the Satanic Panic in every way, shape, or form. Like those were kids that, like, so here in the US, I think they may not have been thought about as congruent, even though they really are.
Yeah, I associate that more with like R.L. Stein, right?
Right. And then Write, Teach, Play says, I might argue that writing and journaling in general have a stronger tradition in the UK and other European countries than we have in the States, which I think 100% spot on. Yeah. And then somebody says there are a bunch of solo 3.5 materials. Yeah, I think we're
Brandon Landgambetta, great people.
Yep.
Brandon.
Yeah, BLG, so good to have you here. And so but yeah, DM yourself was one I was going to mention also too, because it took that and it just said, yeah, whatever you're playing, here's some ideas on how to solo that game up. I even saw Muspel Hell, which we covered, which was an OSC thing. It was a mega dungeon that also just had solo rules, which is, for an OSC thing, it's so easy. Yeah, just build a huge party of essentially your low-level hirelings and then start funneling them through this mega dungeon and see what happens, We
haven't talked about DCC. Speaking of funnels, right?
You didn't.
DCC did pretty well. Before we go off that, I do just want to mention very quickly for solo play. America did have a solo play culture around tunnels and trolls. It just never got as wide.
True.
But I just want to tag that. But yeah, DCC, sorry.
No. It's just, we're talking about the, groups that collaborate and push games in their system, systems that dominate the space, right? I don't remember if this was true about ZQ1, but ZQ2 and ZQ3 had a really, really strong DCC presence, and Goodman was really, really good about pushing all of those projects. Yeah. I don't know that I have any more or smarter commentary. It just seemed like a strange omission when we touched on that topic.
Yeah, I feel like DCC is such a polarizing system for people. Like, I love DCC. I played a couple of a couple standout DCC projects. Blackout is one I played. I'm actually going to be playing it again, not this weekend, but next weekend as part of a charity drive. We're going to do a bounty board, and for every teenager that dies, we're going to ask people to donate. Because the theme is 80s horror teenagers in a small town, and so your low-level party are all like recent high school graduates. And so, so if you want to help support survivors of sexual abuse, come back next Saturday night and watch a bunch of teenagers die and give some money. But Blackout was a really cool take on the DCC funnel concept. We even saw it's a mosh project, but we saw the Drain was a funnel level project, which had some major DCC feels to it in the way that it was executed. There was also a DCC project. The title's escaping me right now, but there was Diogo did some of the art for it, but it was a time travel DCC adventure. Like, you were telling the tales of this inn, at three different distinct points in times it was on this Zine Quest that looked incredibly creative for a DCC project. I saw some really cool DCC stuff come out. I think the thing for me is a lot of times DCC art on projects doesn't necessarily grab me. Like sometimes they do. And that's a huge part of what makes me click through on something, which is very interesting in Zine Quest, right? Because you're dealing with very low budget projects, so the art level is typically nowhere near as high, unless the person is the artist. But I saw some really cool DCC projects come through still at the same time.
Cool. This is going to bother me. I didn't realize Diogo did a CQ thing this year, and now I feel super bad.
It wasn't his project. He just did the art for it, but he contributed a couple things this year. Yeah, it wasn't his project. So he's working on Cosmosaurus right now, I think. It's pretty hard.
Yeah.
200 projects just wasn't enough.
Yeah, 200 wasn't enough. And so
there's never enough.
So let's talk about, we've talked a little bit about solo games, but let's talk about the top of the leaderboard. So Bucket of Bolts came in. As we said, Artifact was #1 last year. You know, Adam asked in the chat, World Champ Gameco asked in the chat, did Shut Up and Sit Down boost Bucket of Bolts? I didn't see anything by anyone for Bucket of Bolts, like as far as a lot of any external publication. But I also love the way that Jack approaches projects from a couple levels. But I'll let you guys share your thoughts first. What were your thoughts on Bucket of Bolts? Why do you think it did so well? What do you think were some of the contributing factors? What are the lessons people could maybe take away from that?
Do you want to go, Ben?
Sure. I mean, I think consistently the best predictor of how well you do this year is what type of community or outreach you've previously had. Before we started the video, we mentioned Through Alton's Door, which didn't have a previous Kickstarter presence, but has sold multiple zines and has sort of had a long history of fans. Yeah, last year the Artifact made 35K, and when you walk in with another project, you're going to do well. And sort of the built-in Kickstarter momentum is once you start doing well, you do better, and once you do better, you do better. And then there's almost a sense of you want to be involved in a big event, and then it just keeps doing better. Now, 100K is well more than I would have guessed, but I'm not surprised it was the top of the list.
Yeah.
But 100K is a lot. So.
There's a level at which I was like, I really was, Through Alton's Door was like neck and neck for the first couple days. You know, obviously it's 5 zines. There's a couple reasons why it was able to boost some of those numbers up. But Ben's incredibly driven in the community. And I was actually kind of hoping it would be top spot this year just because I was excited for Ben. I don't think he's upset at all with how the Kickstarter went. Nor is that against Jack. I'm not looking for somebody to dethrone Jack. I'm super excited for Jack also too. But it's just a fun little internal thing. I think for me, one of the things I love about both of those projects, though, and I mentioned this on stream a couple times, they both talk about the craft that goes into the creation of their project in a really intentional way that I don't see a lot of other projects do. The other one that did this just incredibly well was I'm going to mispronounce it. It's The Last Will of Gideon someone Blythe, yeah, which was
Geon's right?
Yeah. Project, which just gorgeous presentation, gorgeous physical product, real craft that goes into making it, and all three of those projects did very well and had that in common. And I don't know that that's the only reason, but I think for Bucket of Bolts specifically, it's not just that is something that's a part of it, but that Jack and Mousehole Press have an established track record of making gorgeous physical products that then people have received now and are excited about. And I think there's a huge piece that goes into some of that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the aesthetic component can't be understated, right? Nailing the aesthetic to the degree that Jack consistently does is, for I think the kind of insider design community, really, really important. A lot of us, buy things to put them on the shelf. We are so inundated with awesome games that we just buy them and may never even use them, may just read them. I also think it's important mentioning from like a marketing perspective how important that previous big boost is, right? I'm almost less surprised by this earning 100K than Artifact earning 35, right?
Yeah.
Because once you earn 35 with the number of backers you get, if you keep the pressure up, which Orbital, another very sexy looking game. Jack is in many ways a consummate marketer of good design. It becomes easy, right? It's a 3x growth from one project to another is big, but it's not gargantuan. I've certainly seen that before. I've seen it, it into the millions of dollars on Kickstarter, let alone the hundreds of thousands.
I mean, that's Freelik's entire business model, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And
I do, I guess. Yeah.
Gloomhaven, right? Kingdom Death Monsters. Most of the big dogs get there because they have one successful project and then they have a follow-up that's multiples of their initial successful project.
Yeah.
What I wonder is how Jack got that 35 to begin with, right? I like Artifact. It's a really clever idea, and both the first version and the second version are very pretty. And shout out to Jack. He mailed me like 10 copies of the first one to use in my program, and the kids love them. But yeah, I just wonder how. Yeah, the arc of Muscle Press makes perfect sense to me, I guess.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think another thing to note is like Jack is like my copy of Artifact arrived, not at all, but the envelope did. It was slit down the side. There was nothing inside of it, and I was like, oh, like, hey, I got an envelope today with no game inside, like total thing. Like, let me know if I need to pay for shipping, and he was he's like, no, I'm actually sending out the premiums next week. I'll just drop one of those in the mail for you, right? Like the upgraded version of the game. And I was like, oh man, what a sweetheart. And then that one never showed. And so I messaged again like 4 months later, and then they both showed up within a week of each other because he sent out another package. And so like we gave one away like on the channel, like, but it was just the generosity of like, no, I just want to make sure you get this project. I was like, don't worry about it if you don't want to resend one. It's fine. I just want to make sure, and just for your own records, no game only, envelope. But yeah, just absolute, generous individual. And so, no, I think that the arc, and I think we'll only see continual growth. I do think a big part of the Artifact thing, and somebody said it in the chat, was the shut up and sit down boost numerous times. Like shut up and sit down, which has a much broader appeal, and solo RPGs might be something that somebody who wouldn't pick up a normal RPG because there's no social pressure or performative pressure might be willing to try, has featured them numerous times. And I do, as somebody who creates content for games, like who's potentially part of like the ttrpg press, there's value to that. And there's a reason there's value to that. And Shut Up and Sit Down outside of that has just such a huge follower that I think really helped kill it for them early on in Artifact, and helped to boost some of that up. So yeah.
There's also since Shut Up and Sit Down does cover a wider spectrum of the analog games industry than kind of just the narrow vertical of role playing, I think it's worth mentioning that there is a longer history in board games as well as kind of early and specifically British RPGs of solo play, right? And you walk into any hobby store and you ask, okay, what small pack items go really fast? And it's like the Unlock series or the Exit series, these escape rooms in a box that people can play solo. Those move like hotcakes. That style of play is, if anything, much more widespread. Yeah. So it makes sense that someone like Shut Up and Sit Down would recognize that, feature it, blow it up, and then, just continual snowball uphill. Yeah.
And I'm just curious because I forget, have you ever bought 10 copies of an Unlock game to play with a large group at a workshop? Because I certainly have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My business partner has every single Unlock and Exit, and I have a minimum of 5 of each.
Yeah, I think so. I'm about the same. So, because yeah, it's a great community activity, to walk people through, especially from a design or team building perspective. So, awesome. Like I said, I think there's a couple of pieces. Let's, I want to talk a little bit about kind of where we see Zine Quest going in the future as we're coming up maybe towards the end of our time here. We've got maybe about 20, 25 more minutes. Before we do that, I'd just love to hear what's another project each of you loved from this last Zine Quest. Joe, tell me what yours is, and then we're going to talk about Ben's while I pull up your link and get that ready to go.
God, it's hard. My short list, as I said off chat, was 10 items. So it's like, what the hell am I?
Well, you start thinking. I'll pick it up real quick at the end. Then, so Ben, go ahead and tell me another one of yours.
I can do two by the time. So I think one thing that I think is really interesting was Wise Women.
Okay.
It's a PBTA game, and sort of the interesting thing that grabbed me about it was rather than have your classic playbook set up, what you do is you're basically the wise women of this village, and there's this tension of, are you accepted by the community or like pushed out as a witch effectively? And the really interesting part mechanically is your moves are based off of what plants and herbs you've gathered. Each thing you gather has, I think, 3 moves attached to it. So you're basically slowly but surely shifting out your playbook, which does different things, and then building sort of your reputation on a scale of accepted to rejected. Yeah, it just looks like a really interesting take on PBTA, and there's a lot of good, reasonable PBTA games that don't really try and mess with the formula, and I'm always excited when I see something actually trying to do something new. So that was really cool.
I feel like the PBTA games I get the most excited about are the ones that do something differently. Brendan was on just a second ago, but like Passion, which influenced Aaron King's Patchwork World second edition, like or 6th edition, sorry, as well as the second edition. I think are absolutely phenomenal. Like flexes on the PBTA core system with questions as stats. I'm 100% excited when I see people doing those small little shifts, because there's a ton of parts about PBTA that I love, and then I'm like, when I go to sit down to design, I'm never like, I just want to roll 2d6 and figure out what the resolution is. I always want to do something a little bit different, and so watching people flex on that model is always super interesting to me. And so, all right, Joe, did we find one?
Yeah, so something you had said earlier and that I didn't bring up. So, the solo journaling RPG experience, I think, does have a lot of parallels with world building games, which in the indie scene do have more, right? You can see a lot of the same play impulse in things like Ben Robbins games, right? Whether it's Microscope or anything else. And I think that vein is still around. An early project from like first few days was the Power Words engine.
Oh my gosh,
and that was
project.
Yeah, that one immediately that's the kind of solo activity that I engage with. Is the world building or system building creative versus the narrative creative solo. And so Power Word Engine by Dom Liotti is just a way to build magic, right?
Yeah.
Within your world. And I thought it was really neat. It leveraged language and linguistics in really fascinating ways. And it's the kind of thing that I can tack on to really anything, and just enhance the play experience of basically any type of game.
Yeah, I went in at the level. Oh no, I did go into the level where I get to add a word of power to the lexicon
Nice.
On that one, because there wasn't any way I wasn't going to have a mark in the book on this one when it was an option. I messaged Dom as soon as I discovered it. Like somebody had recommended it on one of the daily streams. I went and looked at it, and I was like, it makes me like, there's so much work that went into this, and it's so excellent that it actually makes me sad that it isn't the game itself. Like I want another 3 pages of very rules light crap added onto this. It just makes this the game and not just something I can add to other games. I want to add it to other games also, but I would just want to play where this is the main focus of the setting, which there are any number of ways I could also just figure out how to do on my own. But such a really kind of cool project with so much potential. Yeah. Awesome. I am going to mention Torque. Torque is a project that I absolutely adored. This is Will's project. I've talked about it a number of times. It was on one of my top 10 most anticipated list, which I was excited about all of, but the more and more I've seen from Torque, the more and more excited I get about Torque. Such a cool project. And I want to talk about this specifically. Like Will and a number of other people did a much better job this year of building out their reward structure, but I thought Will's was actually one of the best examples of what I think good reward structures look like. I actually would have even potentially encouraged Will to go with some sort of dumber, higher $200 level would have been my only thing I might have added. And that I might have backed it had it been an option. I know you can just give people $200, but
Venmo exists.
Yeah. But the main thing about this to me is I've become a little obsessed with, okay, how do I get my friends who won't try a role-playing game to try a role-playing game? And the ability to sucker them in with, we're just going to play a Car Wars-ish, board game with like Road Warrior style board game. Great. And then be like, okay, now we're at the rest stop. What are we going to do? Like, let's just chill and role play for a little bit. And I think the low stakes of that and compared to the action would be something that we've talked about. Like if board games are 0 and RPGs are 11, what's the 1 to 10 scale that gets people from a board game to an RPG? And I think Torque perfectly hits 5 in a lot of ways, like that perfect middle ground. Not only that, designer I love, phenomenal project, great look to it, theme I love. Just a lot of really, really cool things. And so I also love that the description for the soft apocalypse was the world is weird gone sour. Like for me, a lot of those like short evocative terms on a Kickstarter page will absolutely jump out at me any day of the week and make me be like, I don't actually 100% know what that means, but I love the way it feels, and I'm going to hit back now because of that. And so
Torque is a really interesting example, and I Will might take umbrage with this, or he might be glad to hear it or not care at all. I don't know. Sorry, Will. But I consider Torque in this vein of, it's almost like a resurgence of like Wesleyan Bronstein-esque game design, right? Of slipping role-playing elements into a thing that we don't think of as inherently role-playing. As you said, the 5, the introduction. I'd almost say that, like, although this is not where Will's designs tend to go, I think of like Torque as pitched almost like in an FKR sense, right? Like it's just whatever you want it to be. It feels like OG role playing, like before we had the term role playing. If post-apocalyptic shit was as popular as it was today, but in the late 60s, early 70s, I think you would have gotten something like Torque. It's just very interesting to see how we circle back to this kind of old design, even when we're not thinking about like the OSR space.
Yeah. Well, and having listened to, we'll talk about it a little bit. I also love Zine Quest as an opportunity to float out a first game, or the first in a series of games that you want to create, or something that you want to make very hackable. Like the weight of a zine lends itself either to hacks or supplements for other things, or very base system. Let's explore and expand this world together. I love the ability to do that, and Torque I think hits that really, really well. And that's like every game I put out in Zine Quest both years has been something I'm like, I want the community to be able to do something with this once I'm done with it. I don't just want this to be mine, but I also want to continue to release more stuff in this world. So let's scratch the surface, define the system, and get it out the door. And we can always do more later. Through Old Hands Door absolutely also does that. Like I know it's the third one, it's the first Kickstarter, but I also know, I'm talking to Ben, like Through Old Hands Door 14 is written in Ben's head. And it's just continuing to expand the world, because it's a world that he runs for his players. And so like the content's already there and ready. And I love, that's one of the main things I love about it is first time introductors, but also like, here's a passion project of mine that I just want to be able to drop more stuff for in the future. And so, Ben, any thoughts on Torque? Did you check out Torque? Did you get your driver's license?
I have some friends who backed it. It looked really cool. I loved the play sheet. I thought was a beautiful piece of design down there, really attractive. I was happy to see it do so well.
Yeah. I think the other thing that that's worth mentioning is the concept of online play being a major feature of how the game is put together, which right now is a huge selling point. And the only reason we haven't done a live stream of it yet is because we want that. Like Will wants that, and therefore I want for them for that to be as close to done as possible before we showcase it. So just super excited about it. Absolutely. So if you haven't checked out Torque, please go do. I think it's going to take you to Will's Twitter right now, and pre-orders will be up at some point in the future. So let's talk about what we see. There was a lot of data, a lot of things. I know that we could probably talk for hours about about any or all of this stuff. But let's talk a little bit about Zine Quest, future. This was the third Zine Quest. A lot of people were confused about whether Zine Quest was happening this year or not, even though myself and like 3 or 4 other people had gotten emails in, I think, December saying like, oh no, it's happening, we just haven't put it out. When I asked Kickstarter, like when I asked John and Anya early on, they said, yeah, people should just plan on it this year because we didn't say it wasn't happening, which is like for their other projects, I think like nobody's like, when is Make 100 happening? Is it Make 100 happening? Right? Like people just either know about it and assume it's happening, or they don't and they don't care. And the assumption was kind of Zine Quest should have operated the same way to a certain degree. When we did ask Anya just to give us a little bit of detail, and the decision for that will be apparently made at the end of this year, whether there will be a Zine Quest 4. So we don't know right now, other than Anya also said there were a lot of great things that happened in Zine Quest. For a little bit of insider stats, there are, I think Anya said, 500 to 600 projects that are in the game section live on Kickstarter at any given point in time. On average, right? Like sometimes it dips a little lower, sometimes it dips up higher. There are over 700 games during the month of February, numerous times that were live in the game section on Kickstarter. So it is a 20 to 30% increase over the normal amount of work that a 3-person team are doing. We had this conversation in the RPG Zines group last week. It's easy to think about Kickstarter as a giant faceless entity, and sometimes that is how Kickstarter absolutely operates. But when you're thinking about the games department, it's way more helpful to think about it as like John and Anya, who you're emailing and interacting with, and who are real people, who you can really say, hey, can I get some help with this for, than just to like rage post online because your project isn't like ready yet. Like, not to say that any of those things aren't valid feelings or ways to be, but it's actually way more helpful to engage the individuals as individuals to get projects and other things move forward. So with all that said, it's a big project. It was a big thing this year. I'd love to hear from you, Ben, Joe, and if there's other things we want to talk about afterwards. We've got a couple questions from chat. Lone Archivist topped in that we'll talk about at the end. If you guys have questions, let us know also. If Zine Quest 4 happens, or next year in February, or over the next year, what are some things that you think zine lovers should be doing as they think about future projects?
You mean creators or backers?
Yes, creators.
Or creators?
I'll take both, but I mean creators first and foremost.
Sure. I mean, I think I would bet money Zine Quest is happening again next year. Like they made close to $2 million on it this year. Like there's no reason not to. I can't imagine it's significantly more work for the amount of profit. So yeah, I think it's going to happen. I think a really big thing to think about is how to differentiate, because if this year was that much larger than last year, I mean, there is a cap, obviously, but next year will most likely be significantly larger than this year. So how do you differentiate? I think obviously keeping your finger on the pulse and seeing what's popular is always useful. Journaling games, obviously, this year, but I think figuring out a cool pitch that no one else is doing, topics that people really aren't hitting. If you happen to be an artist, you're always at a little bit of an advantage because you don't have to pay for art. keeps your costs down. Yeah, I think I would plan on it though. Yeah.
Joe, you're shaking your head. It looks like an agreement.
Yeah, no, same boat. If anything, I could imagine that Kickstarter adds a junior staff member to the games team, even if temporarily, right? They're receiving the same cut per project. In fact, they might even be receiving more because they're handling fulfillment versus an outside service generally at the scale that these are operating versus like board game Kickstarters or larger RPG Kickstarters. So yeah, from a business perspective, I can't imagine Kickstarter putting the kibosh on this after the amount of money they probably made this year. That said, I think it's going to be more difficult, right? Even from 2 to 3, there's been a rise in professionalism in the quality of the pages. There has been a rise in the importance of network effects, be it with past customers or with the design space and the people in it for marketing reasons. I remember ZQ1 was, there were some pretty professional projects, but it was a lot of, kind of punk DIY aesthetic of just putting some shit up there and hyping it up and seeing what happened. That feels very different from what ZQ3 was and still is, because there's still some live projects. I can imagine that trend only continuing.
Yeah.
Which I think will make it just substantially more difficult for first-time creators. If I had any advice, it would be, don't launch your first game for Zine Quest, right? Launch your first game 6 months before Zine Quest, build that audience, get in with some designers. Like, it sucks to say, but this is like any kind of work thing, right? It's going to be the people you know and how hard you sell yourself and how big your market is before the thing launches.
Yeah.
If you're relying on having a really cool, sexy idea that people are going to glom onto, especially if it's a concept versus an aesthetic, I think you're kind of just going to get fucked.
Which it is, I think, hard. I think one of the tensions people feel internally is that all seems super antithetical to Zine culture for an event called Zine Quest. And I think we have to identify, like, Zine Quest, I don't feel like was really intended to be about Zine culture so much as early RPG culture. And I don't know that it hits that mean properly, but there was some of that lived in the like the club zine, but some of that lived in, that was the format that RPGs were being printed in, because they were article conglomerations that were put together in an inexpensive format, and they were 2 or 3 color small books that were sold for money. Like, they weren't swapsies, like and so I think we have to kind of look at that a little bit more broadly. I asked for a little bit of rules clarification, didn't really get any, which my big question was, like, the rules exist, but they seem to not be enforced. This year, the people, the staff actually pushed back and told people, like, you didn't follow the rules, while then just still putting Zine Quest on their project, like, which, in all honesty, that's it, whatever. Like, it's Kickstarter's thing, and I'm totally behind, like, whatever they're gonna do. I think that people are a little confused by that. I would love to see maybe some more clarity around that. I think for creators, most of my advice, I think, would follow y'all's. I think it'll happen. I think, my prediction was between 350 and 400 projects next year. I think everyone who's out there who's thinking about a project for next year should 100% think, who are the 3 or 4 people I want to do a project with, and go invite those people to collaborate. Because I think one of the things it'll do, you'll bring together more individuals into the project, which is always good from an audience, from a relationship standpoint. But also, it'll help, if people do that, it'll help bring the overall number of projects down, because it won't be you and them and your other friend and your 4th friend putting up projects. It'll be, hey, here's our project together. And I would love to see more larger collaborative projects and less of them. And when I say larger, I just mean bigger numbers for everybody, than just a million of them, because I also think it's a better way to create some space for you. Zine Quest rules,
launch early.
Yeah, launch. Well, that's the other thing. I was telling somebody, I think the best time to launch is actually the week before Zine Quest. Like, everyone is waiting. Don't do it. That's my time frame. I'm calling it right now. I'm the only one allowed to do it. Like, everyone's ready to spend money. No one actually cares if it's Zine Quest or not, but everybody's excited for the zines coming out. So launch January 1, or sorry, launch January 25th, and just roll into Zine Quest, and you'll get the tagger you want, but, like,
doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean,
there is a very real first mover advantage this year.
Yeah.
It's
I don't know. I think name recognition matters more, because, like, Vincent Baker walked in and made 10K in a couple days, right? There's plenty of projects that made a lot of money in the second half of Zine Quest. I think the thing, though, is a lot of those people had communities and followings and were known. I think if you're launching something at Zine Quest, you should be talking about it at least 2 to 3 weeks before Zine Quest is the big thing you can do. And I think thinking about Zine Quest rather than about the production qualities, think about it as space constraints, I think is good. What is the best thing I can do with limited space? I mean, it's weird and it's tough to say, because, like, more projects percentage-wise funded this year than last year, right? Last year was 94%, this year's 97%. So, like, it could just be that continues to be a benefit. But yeah, it certainly feels like once you start hitting 400, 500, 600 projects, like, there's gonna be a wall at some point.
There has to be, right?
Yeah.
We're increasing number of projects faster than I think we're increasing number of people who are looking at the space.
100%.
Yeah.
And we had a lot more projects eke out just over the funding barrier. It felt like this year. Like that, I would have loved if we could have pulled, but I think would have been a nightmare to try to do, and probably unrealistic. But yeah, I 100% think that we probably saw a lot more projects just fund this year than massively overfund. That's just a feeling from looking at things. No actual quantitative. Yeah,
we might have those numbers in a couple months. I know some people who want to do some digging, and we have all those Zine Quest 2 and 3 data now. So
yeah, if you want to get in on that, we'd love it. So I'm going to hear from you guys, maybe one more project you loved, and then we're going to take just questions from the audience, if that works for everybody. Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right.
Sounds great.
So let's go Ben first, so that Joe has time to make up his mind. I've got your third one here. Is that the one we're going to talk about?
Errant. Yeah, let's talk about Errant. So Errant is I guess it's a black hack is how it started. Let me pull this up here myself. It's a very cool looking 2-zine project for a new OSR game, basically. And sort of the what questions does black hack not answer? The thing that really got me to back it, actually, if you have the page up, Ava linked to some pretty significant design blog posts. So if you want to know like what the game is about, you can read like a couple thousand words very easily on exactly the questions it's answering, how it's thinking about them. It's really smart design approach. And the other thing that's very cool is they had a card page where you can see sort of a very limited version of the game in a really easy to play with digital form factor.
I know everyone's watching right now. I'm scrolling way too fast as I'm trying to get to things. I just made somebody sick, and I apologize. Yeah, the card page was a phenomenal move. And then Ava, who I know is watching right now, she does just such a great job of articulating why certain design choices are made in an incredibly smart fashion. we played it a few weeks ago. I had a blast with it. It feels so crisp and clean, and I don't think anybody playing it would ever suspect how much intentionality goes not only into the simple design, which simple design is harder than complex design, in all honesty. And then some of the meta concepts that you should apply when running and playing the game that may not be explicit, but the game perfectly lends itself to. Killer team also too, like excellent team on this project, I will say. The art is excellent. Everything about it was great. I'm super excited about this one, and absolutely was a huge fan of it. Joe, I saw you getting pumped up when we mentioned it.
I was very excited about Errant. That was the one that I was hyped for even before it actually launched. Also, the thing you said, Ben, about giving some of the design thinking behind your project, I think is a really interesting approach. You can see that in like Stone Top as well, where there's this long arc of what went into the design of this game, so that people can really dig into it and go, okay, is this going to be something that's interesting to me? Are they tackling questions that I care about? Okay, so I have one that I'm gonna just name, but I don't actually think it's technically a Zine Quest project, so I don't think it counts. And that's Nerves by John Battle.
It was a Zine Quest. Everybody's seeing the back end of my my Twitter right now. It was a Zine Quest project.
Okay, cool. Well, Nerves is awesome, and I love John, and I've stanned that kid for I don't know. I actually don't know if he's a kid. I don't know why I refer to him that way. I've loved his work since he did like weird drive-through adventures. But anyway, so I think that's really exciting. I just love books about games, and there were a bunch of really interesting ones. Ninth Level, who did Mazes last year or the year before, has Xenography, a bibliography of Zine Quests, which I think is going to be...
Which people had a lot of very different feels about. It feels like there should have been some larger conversations around that. I actually think they went about it in a pretty okay way overall. But yeah, there were a lot of feels about the Xenology.
Yeah. But I want to shout out Splat 2 Adventures in Cyberspace. That's, I think, my third pick, by Sam Hotchkiss. Splat 1 was last year, I believe, or maybe ZQ1, I don't remember, but it's a collection of essays from various designers and people in the game space. I don't know, Sam just does really good work as kind of an editor of editorial opinions. And in the same way that I'm just inundated with games, I'm fascinated by the people who work adjacent to the space as well as in the space.
Yeah, I remember I backed Splat as like a no zine left behind in Zine Quest 2. Like it was one of the, I feel like it was one of the later ones that was struggling. But I just did it at the PDF level, and this year I went back and got Splat 1 at the print level. Also when I backed it, it was well done and deserved the extra support. So 100% solid game.
I think I think there's this really interesting arc of within and without Zine Quest of zines that are looking at games. You and Clooney did All That Glitters is Palladium a bunch of years back, and like there's just as you said, the early history of zines is as much about the format of the games themselves as fanzines discussing the game and giving play reports and things like that. Seeing us continue that aspect of the hobby and that trend within the industry is really, I don't know, it's fun, and I'm glad it's still happening.
Yeah,
so
awesome. Yeah, there's still a couple of those I'm waiting for from Zine Quest too. I won't throw any of them out by name, but no, Splat was great. A couple ones I want to mention. Grasping Nettles was I'm a huge fan of Avery's games that we were talking about earlier, but world building games in general. Grasping Nettles was great. If you haven't checked it out, you absolutely should. Another one is Tension by Adira, whose name I learned to pronounce properly early on in Zine Quest 3. And so, but I backed Adira's last set of games, was super excited about Tension. Just love the games that she makes, and so I was super excited about Tension also too. And then there's this game called Repugnant. I'm just going to go ahead and promote it because if you haven't, Pledge Manager is coming next week. So just since you two didn't enjoy it or like it, it's fine. I get it. It's the world's most disgusting RPG. You can go check it out. ttrpg.link/gross-RPG if you want. It's all just this entire thing has been a ploy for me to plug my own game one more time. And so that was absolutely what all this was really about. So no, we've got a couple questions from people. I think one of the big ones is people felt like there was less support this Zine Quest than there was last one. I think some of that was the late announcement. I think some of it was projects maybe taking a little bit longer to get approved, people not knowing how to navigate the system if they were first timers. But I also don't know that there's ever been a lot of institutional support for Zine Quest. I mean, I think there's a feeling like it was clear last year in a way that it wasn't for the first one, and then a feeling like it was less clear this year, and that we've equated that to institutional support. But I will say it is kind of surprising. A lot of what makes Zine Fests great is the community aspect of that. In Zine Quest, there is none of that proposed by Kickstarter itself. And I think that's a really interesting kind of miss. It's why we did what we did. It's why, Ben does what he does on his site. Like, it's the community saying, we want to support this. We want to see these great things happening. What are some of your thoughts about maybe the way that Zine Quest can expand in the community beyond just what Kickstarter is doing? Because I think that's the healthiest place to have that conversation is what can we do to create some of that space and some of that feel?
I mean, I will. Oh, or you can.
No, you go, Ben.
I was going to say, but before I even mentioned that, I just want to say there was a shift in leadership this year too. So I do want to say that might have had something to do with it, taking over the reins without clear intention. So I do want to give them a little credit that hopefully next year might have a little bit more planning and organization. Now there's a bit more experience with that team. But I think resources for people are always useful. Sort of, I always see people post random blog posts on how to make a zine, printing information, best options on Mixam, but it's sort of disparate. I imagine if somebody put together a list of resources on the printing side of things, distribution information is always tough. Shipping always ruins a lot of projects that otherwise would be successful. Yeah, I think some sort of collated resource site for how to create and run a zine might be the most useful thing somebody can do. There's a few people putting up blogs though. I know Ben Lawrence talked about it a while ago.
Ben did. Ian Usom's just done a killer job of showing his own work on the entire process and then sharing thoughts too. So I would shout his blog out. CA Berlitz, this will be available as a video on demand later, both here on Twitch, but the best place to catch it is going to be youtube.com/+1exp later on, because I'll go through and link stuff up on this video also. But yeah, no, I absolutely, I mean, like I said, I think there's a whole lot of questions, but again, I think you're also dealing with so many first-time creators who have never navigated Kickstarter before from a creator standpoint, and them needing a lot more hand-holding and support. I actually was telling somebody, I don't think it's the number of a project increase, it's the major issue. I think it's the amount of people who need a little bit of hand-holding that actually, if anything, increases the work, is what probably increases the work. And so...
Yeah, I mean, if anyone listening has not used the Kickstarter backend, it has maybe the worst inbuilt word editor I've ever seen. It is a nightmare to use that system. It is deeply unintuitive. It does not provide really any support or guidance. Using Kickstarter is a uphill battle, and the people who do it the best are often people who have done it many, many times before and have just learned how to navigate a really poorly built backend. And that sucks. But I think you're totally right. As more people do it, as much as I think there is a need for guides and data on and how to produce scenes and trends and things like that, honestly, a like Kickstarter backend for dummies would, I think, be amazing, right? We do have, Ian putting up his design process and the project process. Zeshio from last year, the data collated. Ben, obviously, your work this year. There are people, it's been great, right? And there have been people who, since ZQ1, have been putting this stuff up. And I think a collated collection, if someone created a ZQ4 project that was just how to navigate zine creation, I think it would do bonkers good, especially if it was just a collaboration of all the people who had done blog posts. But I think that big thing, you're totally right, is if you're new, and that's ostensibly the point of Zine Quest, is to bring new people in to the Kickstarter community for role-playing games. It just, you have no tools for figuring it out, right? I'm very accustomed to using bad corporate backend software. I have to do a lot of that for my work. And when I did my first Kickstarter that I ran myself last year, it was a nightmare, right? I had to get input from, thankfully, I had good friends who would run Kickstarters. But yeah, do your due diligence. Run a really small, crappy project in like 4 months, right? For anything. It doesn't even matter if it funds, right? Just so that you can have the experience of running a Kickstarter and looking at what that system looks like and how to build out a campaign page and all that stuff, so that when you do a ZQ4 and it's your first Zine Quest, it's not also your first Kickstarter.
Which I would say, like, Zine Quest 2 was good for that. Zine Quest 3 was not, and I don't think future ones will be either. Zine Quest 2 was an excellent opportunity to run your first small project and learn how to do something. I don't feel like Zine Quest 3 was, or that's necessarily where we're headed in the future. No, I love it. I think one of the other big questions we're seeing from people right now, and this has been a big conversation in a couple different communities I'm a part of. Do we think that Zine Quest potentially has outgrown Kickstarter itself because we're seeing more and more of this community support? Specifically, we saw the first couple projects launched on itch this year, and there's been a lot of conversations around itch funding, or, is it better to just, if you can print it, which I would say Kickstarter, if above anything else, is actually a marketing tool, not even a good pre-sales tool. And then, why, and this is a bigger conversation. And again, I want to know, like, if Anya was here, I would have absolutely still thrown this conversation out. Like, what do we do that maybe above and beyond this? And how does anyone feel about that? But I'm going to still toss it out to you two also.
Ben, I know you have feelings, but I'll take this one first because I'll be quick.
Yeah, for sure.
This is maybe a contentious point. I don't think it is literally possible for Zine Quest to outgrow Kickstarter. I think Zine Quest is a Kickstarter initiative. It is a marketing and sales channel. I think zine creation and the importance of zines within the hobby is absolutely outgrowing Kickstarter. And I think there is a very strong case to be made for people just launching zines year round through other platforms. Itch is not the best for physical production, distribution, and drive-through product quality sucks ass. So it can be difficult to do that, but I don't know. I mean, if you have a really rad thing, just reach out to like Matt at Exalted Funeral or Nick Masiak. If you want to sell stuff in Canada, or Jared for Spearwitch or whatever, right? There are people out there who are in the distro for zines market already. That is a growing space. And yeah, I don't think if you want to make a zine, Zine Quest is even next year is going to be the necessarily best place to do it, unless you're a big dog.
Yeah. Maybe not a big dog. You just got to be not a puppy anymore.
Yeah. At least a year old.
Yeah. So, Ben, go ahead and hop in.
Yeah, I think Joe's right on a lot of points. I think if you want to know whether Itch can compete as a place for Zine Quest, try searching TTRPGs on Itch and then come back to me and tell me how that goes. It's Itch makes a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a penny on everything they make on TTRPGs. They don't. I'm not going to say they don't care, but if you use the experience long enough, they don't care. They're a video game platform that happens to be reasonable. Bundles are nice, but there's just not discoverability on Itch. And so you might see individual projects, but if you told me there were 400 projects currently going on Itch and you told me to name them all, I would have no possibility of finding them all. I think it would be impossible.
You can go to, oh man, if Keegan, if you're watching right now, or somebody has Keegan's site, toss it to me on Twitter. Our good friend Keegan EXE just started I think maybe itchfunding.com. I'll see if I can pull it up real quick. That is trying to list all the TTRPGs that are funding right now.
I would love to hear the stories on how that goes, because I could tell you weird quirks with trying to track everything on Kickstarter.
I think it's all about finding them. Itchfunding.card.co. Here, I'll drop it in the chat. I think, is that it? Yeah, current. It's actually pretty up to date right now. I mean, there's of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 projects that are Itch funding or Itch funded. I'm gonna drop it into the chat right now. I was joking with Keegan the other day about them being a Kickstarter disruptor. I mean,
yeah. Like I'd be excited to see it if it happens. I have some serious doubts, at least in the currently the way it works. I think 97% funded is like a pretty good number to bet on. Like it's tough to beat that. It's all in one space. It has platform trust. I always make this reference on Twitter, but like if I give somebody a link to drive-through versus give somebody a link to Lulu, they're going to buy it in drive-through 9 times out of 10. And it's not because Lulu is bad, it's because everyone's heard of drive-through.
Right.
You just build a platform trust, and Kickstarter has that in a very meaningful way. And that might not always be a barrier. There are always new platforms. There's always new ways of doing things. But I think at least for the next 2 or 3 years, it's just going to be the primary site to do what you want to do.
Like I said, if I was very clear with people earlier, and I think I still feel this way, I probably won't ever run primary on a Zine Quest again, like being one of the main collaborators. If I'm contributing, absolutely, I'm happy to contribute to people's projects in the future. Running, I would much rather talk about people's games during Zine Quest and back games and support games. And I would much rather run my game in January or March or another time than in Zine Quest for a lot of reasons. But I think I agree 100%. And I think it actually goes back to some of what we were talking about earlier with the insider outsider. Like for us as creators and scene folks, like Itch feels like a good home because it's where we live. It's where we are. We're backing, we're following, we're supporting, we're looking at projects there. Also for the outsider who's just interested in this one project or is friends with this individual or other things like that, I think Kickstarter is still far more accessible. And again, I don't think this is not an anti-Kickstarter question. This is a statement of like we saw a little bit of that this year. We saw a couple people say, "Hey, I want to do Zine Quest, but I can't." I think the big parts of the conversation, and I think I would just say it's not for any of us to say. I mean, people can say whatever they want, but we're not going to be the ones who solve this. RPGC is locked out. The Latin American designer population is locked out, but they found a lot of really good workarounds this year by partnering with people in the U.S. We saw a lot of really strong Latin American games. Tezca Sentai being my outstanding favorite project that I saw come out of Latin American designs this year.
Cool.
There were a lot of great ones. Location locking is a certain thing. How people feel about the platform is always going to be a thing, and there's no way to do that. And then I think transparency support is the other big conversation that is something for Kickstarter to look at how it's dealing with. I think those are some of kind of the reasons this has become more of a conversation. Is if somebody can't operate on Kickstarter the way they're desiring to because of location or something else, then they're going to automatically look for other responses. It was just interesting also to sit and talk with people about, well, why not just Indiegogo, or why not GameFound, which is not currently open to everybody. I get that, but will be probably by the time next year rolls around. There are other options, potentially out there. And are we going to see some of that grow and change as that evolves?
I think there's a mental distinction that needs to be made about Kickstarter, right? And I think we, especially in regards to Zine Quest, we have thought of Kickstarter as a community hub, and it's not. It's a sales channel and a marketing platform, right? If you are in business, your scale will preclude you from participating in certain sales channels and marketing platforms. I cannot, or rather, it is a very bad idea for me to pay large amounts of money for short television spots. I can do it. It's a waste of my time and effort, and it will not generate returns even close to worth the cost I will put out. That's Kickstarter. That's Kickstarter for games in a lot of ways. If you want to participate in what has become the modern Kickstarter ecosystem, you need to scale up to that point. And I think that has been the most marked difference, at least in my eyes, both in Kickstarter as a whole over the past several years, and even between ZQ2 and ZQ3. And I think if we think of Kickstarter as a community hub, we're going to keep running into these problems because they don't have any real interest in being that. And they certainly don't function like it. And I don't know, I wish I had a more positive message than that, but I think it really is just like, that's not the business they're in.
I feel like I don't feel like that's a negative message. I feel like it's an absolute statement of fact. And I don't, that's not a judgment. People often talk about using, Kickstarter itself is very clear. Like they don't ensign themselves as a pre-order option, even though that's how people use them. People really should be approaching it. This is a marketing channel for amplifying the signal of my game, but gaining capital as I do so and selling things ahead. I think it would be really interesting to see people just, if you wanted to, opt out of digital on Kickstarter and just do the physical of your project on Kickstarter while having it up on itch and saying, if you really want this digitally, go here right now and buy it. There's nothing that prevents you from doing that if your game is ready, and you could do itch funding and Kickstarter funding simultaneously if you wanted to, and just say, hey, physical copies are here, digital copies are here, and see how it's an interesting experiment for somebody to run at some point in time, as I write it down as something to potentially run at some point in time. But I do it. Yeah. Axo helped promote the Tezca Sentai project. And it's absolutely phenomenal. I got to play through the combat of it, and it felt 1,000,000,000% like that. So, and there was Noctis Noctis Labyrinth was one of the other major Latin American projects this year also too. So a lot of really good ones. Ben, any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's all right. I think there are other ways to think about RPGs, particularly with like pricing, that people don't talk about a lot. Like I know Realms of Peril got less than 1,000 backers and made over 20K, right? Because they sold box sets. I think you can approach it as a different business model within the same like marketing channel. You can make more money on less products by selling for higher prices. I think that's valid and valuable. I have seen a few projects, including last year. What is it? Street Magic, right? Had the PDF already available, and they were backing for the physical and I think for better art. I think there's a lot of experimentation that can be had around that, and I think that's something that people should be thinking about going to next year too. How to benefit from the system in ways that people aren't doing.
There is an RPG Latin America Jam happening on itch right now. That's excellent. If anybody wants to go check that out and have more of that conversation. And again, if you're not familiar with itch, it's a good time to get familiar with it. Looking at how I think the concept of how to see systems interface with each other is huge. Like Beards was partially successful because it was before I was super into the scene, so I don't know if itch was actually a thing when I started doing it, but because it was like 4 or 5 years ago, so I'm sure it was a thing, but I don't know how popular of a tool it was. I floated
analog,
out
not at all.
Yeah,
really.
I just floated out like as I put some Facebook ads into. Here's a 2-page RPG that I create, or 4-page RPG I created about Beards. If you like Beards or RPGs, give me your email and I will send you the game for free. Which gave me an 1,800 person email list when I launched that Kickstarter, who had already downloaded, played my game. Some of whom had given me feedback. Like there are a lot of different ways you can show your work and grow your support also too. And itch and other platforms can be a great tool in that can lead to a successful crowdfunding project, whether it's on itch, whether it's on Kickstarter, or wherever it is. But yeah, I agree. I think Zine Quest is here to stay. I think it'll probably be the primary, at least for the foreseeable future, unless they just decide not, for whatever reason, to do it again. And then I think we'll probably 100% see the community pick it up and do something with it within that same space. Yeah. And so I love it. I think we got everyone's questions. If you're out there watching right now and you have a question, let us know. We got to go pretty quickly because we've already been on longer than we had agreed to, I think. But it's been a really great conversation. Joe, tell people again where they can find you while people are typing in questions as they have them.
Sure. So again, you can find me on Twitter at IHEART Fargo, like the city or the show. It is not actually about either of those. If you can successfully guess why I heart Fargo and what or who Fargo is, good job. I don't know. I'll send you something. You can find my work at theacademy.games or theacademyofgames.com. And you can email me at joe@theacademy.games.
Awesome. Ben, where can people find you online?
At Pandatheist on Twitter is probably the best place to find me. Pandatheist and I don't know, some 100 number of Discords around. And sooner than later with my own project I'll be talking about. So
awesome. I loved having both of you guys on today. It doesn't look like we've had any other questions come through, though. If I missed your question earlier, you can feel free to toss it back. There were a lot of great things that came through. I really appreciate both of y'all coming on for this. We'd love to have either of y'all back on in the future to talk about your own projects or just other random things. We typically here on Plus One EXP do interviews or content like this on Tuesdays or Thursdays. Next Tuesday, I am talking to Bo about the creation of safety tools, specifically the script change mechanic, why they're important, and other great design conversations. I really hope y'all come back for that. He is just been a phenomenal person. Every time they post in Brain Trust, I'm like, I want to talk more about that thing. And then they say something else amazing, and I don't get a chance to come back to that thing because we're on to the next one. And so I'm excited to sit down for an hour around that. Some other interviews coming up in our Prestige class series around that. So those are Tuesdays and Thursdays, typically around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We do actual plays on a regular basis also too. This weekend we are playing Wander Home. We distinctly only do actual plays with the creators of the game whenever possible, or parts of the dev team. So if you want to see creators run their own game, and not every creator is a great GM, but we just find it's the most pleasant way to do it, because at the end we sit down and we have a conversation with them about our thoughts about the system, ask them questions about design and other stuff like that during our reaction roll portion. But this Saturday at 1 p.m. we're going to be playing Wander Home with Jay. Come back for that. We'll also also be giving away a copy of the game live during that stream. So if you weren't one of the people who backed that game for a whole lot of money also to get a chance to come back and win it. Super excited about that. We've got some other stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks. One thing that we have not announced yet, but is coming up and I am very excited about, is something that we're calling Troika Fest. We're going to be partnering with Melsonian Art Council and a bunch of other content creators. So if you're a content creator out there, in the middle of April, we'll have some dates that go up next week to do something called Troika Fest. It'll be part game jam, but also an encouragement for anybody who's never played Troika to try it for the first time, whether it's at your home table, online in a stream, whatever it is, just to engage in some way, shape, or form. They have a Kickstarter project launching that's all about a magical wizarding world that may be about thumbing their nose at a certain, young adult novelist also too. We're going to be engaging in a lot of content around that also. So come back for Troika Fest. You can find us on YouTube at the link below if you're watching us on Twitch right now, or on Twitch at +1EXP across all social media platforms, or at +1EXP.com online. I certainly don't have a good sign off for this, so we're just going to wave at the screen until I take us off the live stream. Thanks, guys.
Shout out to all the old heads on Facebook.
Yeah.